Welcome to week 5. We'll start with our text, chapters 5 and 8. In chapter 5, we explore general crisis management theories. Some of these include crisis theory, emergent self-organization, crisis coordination theories, communication and community resilience, and fear-dominated communication model. I've advised you before, but I'll remind you now, don't get too bogged down with the theories. It's not like we're going to come test you and you're going to have to quote verbatim the theories. Pull out nuggets from each of those theories that will help inform your work during this course and your work as a crisis communicator. All right, so think about emergency management that involves 4 broad functions: hazard mitigation, emergency preparedness, disaster recovery, and emergency response. Now, these might not apply directly to your organization, but if you take those 4 broad factors, you'll probably be able to fit them, maybe a little bit of different language, to your organization, and that'll help with your planning. Communication, of course, is a factor that helps bring about stability, order, balance in the face of a crisis. You, as the communicator, play a key role in the success of your organization at all times, and of course your abilities, your effectiveness to communicate during a crisis. To some extent, your authors describe how crises are predictable surprises. I like that term. You know a crisis is coming. You can predict it. You just don't know when it's going to come, and you might be surprised by it. But proper planning can help you, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. I like this quote that your authors described for us from Albert Einstein, who's credited with saying, "You cannot solve a problem with the same mind that created it." So you may be having some issues within your organization, or maybe you've experienced crisis within your organization. If you see those repeated, something's not right, and you probably can't use the same mindset to help solve those. So that specifically applies for crisis communication this term. It also applies just to basic general leadership. And of course, with the advent of new technologies, the public is increasingly providing web-based first-hand accounts of a disaster. Sometimes the first time you'll hear of a pending crisis is through a member of the public who records it on their cell phone and uploads it to YouTube, shares it via Twitter, and next thing you know, you're getting a call from a reporter wanting to know or asking for a comment about this that will happen. And that could happen to just about anybody. So you want to have measures in place. You know, who you're going to call, who has release authority. Are there pre-approved messages that you could probably use for just about any crisis that you're not going to have to wait on the lawyer to approve and then your CEO to give final blessing on? Those basic messages are already approved, ready to go, so you can respond. And some of that, of course, comes with experience. Now, even with the best of intentions, missteps are commonplace when managing a crisis. Don't overreact. And don't be surprised if information changes. We have an expression in the military, especially if you're in your command: first reports are always wrong. Doesn't mean anyone's lying. They're not trying to be deceptive. It's just first reports are wrong, especially during a crisis, because information is flowing so fast, things are happening so quickly. It's hard to get all that information accurate in a timely way. So don't be surprised if you have to go out and correct the record. And you can preface some of that by saying, you know, what we know now is, based upon first reports are, that may change. Okay? All right. One of your articles is from Goldford, Ratson, Jacobson, and Parker, 2015, addressing Ebola and other outbreaks. Some good information in there. Especially their note that strong communication at all levels is critical to containing the rapid spread of disease. Now, this is focused on Ebola. That's true of anything. Communication is critical to containing the rapid spread of bad information, the rapid spread of false information, the rapid spread of anything that is ineffective or counter to your organizational goals. Look at page 122, the appendix there. It kind of shows you a communication checklist for addressing Ebola and other outbreaks. See if there's any information that you might be able to glean. Even though none of us hopefully will have to deal with a Ebola outbreak, There may be some lessons in there that you can take from that checklist and apply for your own crisis communication plan. All right, the next article I'll discuss is Heath, 2006, Best Practices in Crisis Communication. They talk about this need for constant attention and making sure that your crisis communication plan is open for debate and refinement. I encourage people to review their crisis communication plan at least once a year. We used to have it on our calendar, and so every year we would go through that crisis communication plan, if not more frequently, depending upon the command. When I worked with nuclear reactors, of course, we practiced crisis communication all the time. And so we didn't need an annual review because it was getting reviewed every time we had an exercise. You may be in an organization that exercises crisis more frequently, and so that would be a great time to, of course, exercise your crisis communication plan. Best practices call for pre-crisis communication, communication during the event, and post-crisis communication. We're usually pretty good at communicating during the crisis. Sometimes okay before the crisis. Excuse me. Not so much afterwards. What kind of follow-up do we have? What kind of lessons learned can we gather in order to help inform future crisis communication? Think about that. And at all times, you want to exhibit honesty, candor, and openness. We've passed the era of no comment. When I went to public affairs training in the military, you were not allowed to say no comment because it shows that you're trying to hide something. And quite frankly, you should never be in a position where you say no comment. If you don't know the answer is I don't know. If it's information that you can't provide right now, I can't provide that information right now, but I will take your question and provide as much information as I can in the future, something like that. Just kind of strike no comment from your vocabulary if you are a professional communicator. All right, another article, Mara, 1998, Crisis Communication Plans. They say is poor predictors of excellent crisis communication. Now I'm going to say at the outset, I don't agree with all of their findings, but I can appreciate where their findings are headed. Okay, and I'll describe that in just a moment. First is that communication is an important element. Second is that communication can and should be planned. Okay, now their point, and this is where I think they're heading us in a good direction, is that it should not be the end-all and be-all. In other words, you can't just plan it and forget it. You've got to practice it. You've got to be flexible. General Eisenhower said in war, before the battle is joined, plans are everything. But once the shooting begins, plans are worthless. I'm not sure they're worthless, but those plans will certainly change, and we need to be flexible enough to make the changes as needed. All right, the final article that we'll review this week are Heath, Lee, and Nee, 2009, Crisis and Risk Approaches to Emergency Management Planning and Communication. The centerpiece for emergency management communication is the persuasiveness of the expert's advice. Think about a hurricane. How willing are the people to heed your advice to evacuate or to take other measures that will help save their life? That's what we're talking about. Now, you may not be in charge of communication for a hurricane, but it's a good way to look at the importance of communication and the centerpiece of that communication being the expert's advice. Of course, risk management and communication center on matters of uncertainty that invoke fear or dread, and they require varying degrees of proactive communication. Okay, so think about the crises that you are likely to encounter and what kind of communication you should develop to help with that. On page 135 of that article, there's a table that talks about information sources likely to be used to get emergency response information prior to a storm or hurricane. It's kind of interesting to see where people get their information, and it'd be more interesting to see how that changes over time. This article is a little bit dated from 2009. We use it because it's got some good information, but as we go through, we see that change. And so it'll be interesting to see how that changes for your organization. And of course, it'll be interesting to see as a field of study how people get their information in the future. All right, that's it for this week. Stay ahead with all assignments. Stay engaged in the discussion board. Most importantly, enjoy your time of learning.